EU4Green, Green Finance webinar, an introduction to green and just transition finance. First, I will go through some housekeeping rules. So your microphones and cameras are switched off for the whole webinar. And we encourage you to ask questions during the webinar, and the time is reserved for answering those questions. If the session ends unexpectedly, please reconnect using the same link. The presentation will be available for download at the EU4Green website in a few days after the webinar, and the webinar is recorded and the link will be shared at the EU4Green website also in a few days. The copyrights of this webinar belongs to the Environment Agency of Austria. Yes, sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Olga Zhminko, and I'm the EU4Green coordinator for Green Finance Outcome. Agenda for today's webinar is introduction to EU4Green, short, then introduction to green finance with a spotlight of the Green Finance Alliance Austria, which is the best practice example for Austria, then introduction to just and transition finance, and a spotlight of example how just transition finance is realized. We will finish with the closing remarks. The objectives, learning objectives of this webinar is to explain what is the difference between sustainable green and transition finance, why the transition and green finance are so important, and what climate change has to do with this, which regulation in connection with the green finance is available in the European Union, and how it relates to the Western Balkans, as the Western Balkans economies intend to enter the EU. What makes the transition to green economy just, and what is the relevance of justice or just transition in the Western Balkans. We will also provide links and hints for where to find more information for further learning by yourself. So I will make a short introduction of our project. So EU4Green project is the funded by European Commission project, and partially with the Austrian contribution. It runs from 2022 till 2025 and covers 6 economies in the Western Balkans. And the aim of the project is to help the economies to get closer to accession to the EU and help with implementing the green agenda in the Western Balkans. The implementation agency of the project is Environment Agency Austria, and we have a website. You can find it on this slide, clicking the link. The mandate of EU4Green, we have 4 outcomes as a mandate. The first outcome covers environmental topics like the pollution water, the pollution air, the pollution soil, sustainable agriculture, circular economy, biodiversity, and decarbonization. The second outcome covers monitoring and reporting of the processes related to green agenda in the Western Balkans. Outcome 3 relates to communication, education, and participation, coordination of cooperation with the civil society organization. And outcome 4 is our green finance outcome. We developed work plan for the 4 years, and one of the work package relates to creating common language, and this webinar is the first in the series for creating this common language on green finance. The implementation party of the project is Environment Agency Austria, and we are the most important environmental expert organization in Austria and one of the Europe's leading environmental consultants. So we have more than 35 years of experience in the field. We have more than 600 experts, and we are working with more than 55 scientific disciplines, speaking with 20 languages, having turnover of 60 million, more than 60 million euro, and we cover projects in more than 60 countries. We have specifically really good expertise in green finance, including the topics of EU taxonomy, EU reporting standards, green financial literacy, biodiversity finance, just transition finance, finance market, climate risk management, strategic advisory, green bond impact reporting, where we work together with the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Austria, and we provide contributions to policy reviews. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this introduction, Olga. Also very warm welcome from my side. I am Nina Maya. I'm also part of the Green Finance team in the Environment Agency Austria, and I'm going to talk to you about green finance today. At first, I want to put green finance into the broader subject of sustainable finance. In the EU policy context, sustainable finance is understood as finance that supports economic growth and also taking the ESG considerations into aspect. So ESG stands for environment, social, governance. So it's not only economic dimensions that's important, but also sustainable ones. On the right side of the slide, we can see how such an investment process could work. You have investors that have capital, and that capital is invested into sustainable investments. And due to those sustainable investments, there is less pressure on the planet, so less weather-related damage, less catastrophes and natural catastrophes. So we have a more healthy planet, and due to the healthier planet, we have less economic harm and therefore more capital again that can be invested in sustainability. But what is green finance? As we just heard, sustainable finance is considering all parts of ESG, and green finance only focuses on environmental aspects. So ESG is not the same as green finance. And those environmental considerations might include climate change mitigation and adaptation. And if we want to see it more broadly, it can also include preservation of biodiversity, prevention of pollution, and the transformation to more circular economy. And green finance has a very important part to play in delivering on those goals, on the policy objectives under the European Green Deal, as well as the EU's international commitments, for example, the Paris Agreement. And it does this by channeling private as well as public funds into those investments and transform the economy into a climate neutral, climate resilient, and resource efficient economy. So on this slide, we can see what I just talked about in a graph. You can see on the bottom in the green circle that sustainable finance includes all the ESG aspects and dimensions, while green finance is only part of it and focuses on the environmental aspects. And if we want to, we could subgroup it into even more into climate finance and low carbon finance. We can also group green finance into targeted green finance and untargeted green finance. Targeted means that you finance specific projects, for example, a green energy project like windmills, or the renovation or the energy efficient renovation of a house. And untargeted green finance means that you give the money or you finance a company that takes ESG considerations into account and follows those principles, but you don't know for sure what the money will be used for. Yeah, but why is climate change everyone's business? Why should we all care about it? On this slide from the IPCC report, we can see in colors how the global temperature changes or did change over the last years since the 1900s. And you can see while until 2020, the temperature increase was around 1 degree, 1.2 degrees. It's going to increase depending on how fast we can decrease emissions and how much we can mitigate climate change and temperature increases up until 4 degrees. And if we take into account what we're already experiencing with 1.2 degrees, very severe heat waves, forest fires, floods, all kinds of natural disasters that are getting more regular, more heavy, more severe. You can only imagine what the world is going to be like with 4 degrees and what kind of world our children and maybe grandchildren have to live in if we don't manage to mitigate climate change as fast as possible. Yeah, on this slide, you can see another concept. It's called the Global Overshoot Day, or if we break it down to the country, it's called the Country Overshoot Day. This concept talks about how wasteful we are using our resources. Like the Earth is able to replenish and regrow certain resources within 1 year. And this shows that we overuse those resources. We use the resources in a way that is unsustainable. So basically, we are using too many resources. We are already borrowing our resources from future generations, from our children, and they might not have such a livable planet anymore. Depending on the country, that day can be very, very early in the year. For example, Luxembourg, meaning they use a lot of resources and live very unsustainable compared to Indonesia, which has its country overshoot day on the 24th of November. But even with their more sustainable lifestyle, they do not manage to reach a full year with their resources that are available to them. And on the left side, you can see the individual overshoot day for the economies in the Western Balkans. On this slide, we're going to quickly look at the Global Risks Report by the World Economic Forum. This report looks at crises and risks we are going to face on a short-term basis, so 2 years, and on a long-term basis, so 10 years. And while we can see on a short term, we are having to deal with a mix of risks, from social to geopolitical to environmental risks. If we look further into the future, those risks are mostly environmental. Like I would say, even number 5, large-scale involuntary migration, is part of environmental because due to the global temperature change and due to those natural disasters, certain parts of the world become unlivable, and therefore people are forced to migrate, even though they don't want to. Yeah, but why do we need green finance? As I already mentioned, we are now around 1.2 degrees Celsius above industrial levels, and we are already experiencing all those consequences that come with it. And it has to be said that greenhouse gas emissions have not yet even peaked, according to the International Energy Agency. But in order to mitigate that climate change and to decrease those temperature increases, we need to transform our society from its current fossil fuel model to a highly renewable and resource efficient and electrified energy system. To do this, we need around 150 trillion US dollars by 2050 and to realize the 1.5 degree target. This would be around 5 trillion US dollars each year. And even though, according to the IRENA report, we are now around 1.3 trillion US dollars each year, this sum must more than quadruple to remain on the 1.5 degree pathway that we agreed on in Paris with the Paris Agreement. But the next part has to be said. It's a very, very important point that even though this number seems so high, doing nothing is going to be even more expensive. So the cost of inaction is way higher. According to a report from Deloitte from 2023, if we stay with the current policy pathway, the global GDP loss by 2070 would be around 8%, while the required investments would be around 6%. So we are going to lose an additional 2% of GDP. Yeah, so while these were international numbers, I'm now going to have a look at the EU numbers. According to the Strategic Foresight Report, we are going to need around 620 billion euros a year additionally to achieve the goals of the European Green Deal and to repower EU. That would be around 390 billion per year for climate, energy and transport, and a further 130 billion per year to achieve the most important EU environmental targets. And then there's even more money needed for climate change adaptation. Basically to prepare for the consequences of climate change that cannot be avoided anymore. So a quick look at where we are at the moment with the investments. This graph on the left shows us the investment flows worldwide, and while we can see that the investments into oil, natural gas, and coal have decreased, and the investments into low emission power and energy efficiency have increased, we are still far away from where we need to be, which is basically zero investments into fossil fuels. And on the right side, we can have a quick look at where the European Union is at, and you can see that most investments go into energy efficiency and low emission power and electricity grids and battery storage. But even in the EU, there is still money going to gas and oil, unfortunately. This needs to change. In this graph, you can very quickly see how every year the annual clean energy investments have increased over the last years. But as we already heard, we are still, unfortunately, too low. But what is the EU doing about this? I know that right now, for you, the EU regulation is not relevant yet, but if you become part of the EU, this might become important to you as well. The EU worked on the EU Sustainable Finance Framework, and it came out in 2018 and was the base for all the regulation that followed, which is a mix of a taxonomy, disclosure regulations, and tools, and they all are integrated into each other and work together. So they're all aligned, and we're going to have a look at those now. The EU taxonomy is a EU-wide classification system for sustainable activities. And to be a sustainable activity, an activity can be eligible. That means it is named as an activity in the delegated acts. And if it is aligned, so an aligned activity means it is only not eligible, but it is only following certain technical criteria and social safeguards, so human rights basically. And the EU taxonomy asks companies to disclose their share of sustainable activities in their turnover, in their capital expenditures, and in their operating expenditures. And who has to disclose this information? We have different groups of companies, basically the largest one first, and the smallest ones last. And according to the grouping, they also have different due dates for the reports and for the disclosures. Next, we're going to look at the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD. This one requires companies to disclose information on a double materiality basis. This means that they have to disclose what kind of impact their economic activity has on the environment and what kind of impact the environment has on their economic activity. So an inside out and an outside in view. This reporting is done on the basis of the ESRS, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, and it is also it is also subject to third-party auditing, so assurance. And as well with the EU taxonomy, we have different groupings into companies according to their size, and also when the reports are due is grouped with the same logic. Yeah, let's have a look at the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the CFDR. The SFDR. This is a transparency framework that asks companies to disclose the sustainability risks and principal adverse impacts on a product level. This leads to a categorization of the products into Article 6, Article 8, and Article 9 products. Article 6 products integrate ESG risk considerations into the investment decision-making process, or you have to explain why ESG is not relevant to you. Article 8 products promote social and/or environmental characteristics, and Article 9 products have a sustainability objective. And this one applies to all financial market participants offering investment products and financial advisors in the EU. And it started from 2022. So let's have a look at the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive 2, MiFID II. This one aims to standardize financial practices across the EU and increase transparency. It requires companies to determine their clients' sustainability preference, and those ESG criteria or sustainability preferences are defined according to the SFDR and the EU taxonomy regulations. So as already explained, they're all intertwined and aligned. And it applies to any firms wanting to access and trade financial services in the EU, and it applies to all types of securities and derivatives. And it entered into force in 2018. Yeah, and now we're going to have a look at one of the tools that I mentioned. It's the EU Green Bond Standard. This one aims to set a clear gold standard for green bonds and also relies on the criteria in the EU taxonomy. And it defines green economic activities, also ensures transparency, and establishes supervision of companies carrying out pre and post issuance reviews at European level. Compared to the other regulation, this tool is voluntary. It entered into force in 2024 and it was implemented in 2025. So thank you for your attention. I'm now going to hand over to our expert from our first spotlight, the Green Finance Alliance. Thank you, Stefan, for being here. I'm going to hand over now to you.
Thank you, Nina, and welcome everybody from my side. In the next few minutes, I want to give you a brief overview of the Green Finance Alliance, which is our lighthouse voluntary initiative for the financial sector, aiming to mobilize capital to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I would like to, and I think we can show you what a role model it might be also for your economies. So before showing you, telling you more about the Green Finance Alliance, I think the first question that we should ask is why we even started this initiative when there's a lot or some other industry-led initiatives already in the world, like the Climate Action 100 Plus or the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which you might be aware of. And we have seen some issues with those initiatives, especially for smaller financial institutions. I think the first big problem is that these initiatives are geared towards big global institutions. So just simply the language can be already an issue to onboard all your employees into really strong commitments and to implement what is necessary to follow them. But beyond that, we see also content-wise some structural issues with these initiatives. And one of the main ones is their relatively low ambition, especially when it comes to the fossil fuels. Moreover, we see that these initiatives lack sometimes in terms of clearer guidance, especially requirements are usually set on a long or medium term and not so much on the short term. So it gives members not a clear step-by-step guidance on what to do next. And the issue related to that, the overall issue related to that, in our view, is the governance, which is driven by the members and not by basically what science would actually tell you to do. And so the Green Finance Alliance, in our view, is solving many of those issues. So the Green Finance Alliance is an initiative led by the ministry. Its key features are its independent governance, and due to that independent governance, also requirements are set independently of members. And this, in our view, also sends out a clear message to external stakeholders, to NGOs, to investors, to rating agencies, that yes, if you are a member, you're really doing the hard work that is necessary to achieve Paris alignment, and you're not watering it down by some by internal policy related issues that you might try to put into your requirements. Overall, we believe that the Green Finance Alliance is really a success story. We have currently around 11 members, and it's growing. So this year we have actually just introduced our newest 11th member. Overall, we all our members encompass an asset base of nearly 100 billion euros, and an employee base of nearly 23,000 people. And so now I want to show you a little bit of what the key features are of the initiative. As already mentioned, one of the key strengths is its governance. So the Climate Ministry of Austria is actually appointing the steering committee, and the steering committee is doing all the decisions, and it's approving all of the changes and so forth. And the steering committee is made up of nominees from the climate ministry as well as the finance ministry. So again, independent of the members themselves. Then there's a coordinating office, which is the Environmental Agency of Austria. So basically that is us. And we at the Environmental Agency of Austria, we're developing the requirements, we're setting new standards, we're giving guidance, we're developing guidelines, and most and foremost also we're doing the monitoring and the evaluation on a regular basis of the requirements. The third pillar, so to say, of our governance is the Independent Advisory Council, and that is made up of very high-level persons from different areas in science and other areas. So we have advisors from institutions such as the Science-Based Targets Initiative, WWF, or the EIB. So let's go to another key strength of the Green Finance Alliance, and these are our criteria. Overall, there's around 65 very detailed criteria, and again, these criteria are really so detailed that members really should know in a clearly and very understandable way what they need to do as a next step, and what is what they have to or what they can look forward to in the next few years to implement. And one of the most important parts that really distinguishes us from other initiatives is the clear fossil fuel phase-out plan, which in the next few slides is also very shown quite nicely. So first of all, there's a clear roadmap on when to phase out of coal and of oil and of gas. So in 2030, phase out of coal and oil, 2035 of gas. And if you look then into the details, you can really see what this means for the members. So if you, for instance, look at coal, you can see that already by 2022, so 2 years ago, no new business activities expanding any coal infrastructure is allowed. And in 2023, a progress reporting should already start, and by 2030, an all-out phase out of all portfolio positions should have been achieved. And these kinds of very detailed criteria also apply to oil and to natural gas. So overall, I hope I could convince you that the Green Finance Alliance really is something very unique and something very interesting. In our opinion, it can be a role model for Europe. It's something that has not been done anywhere else in the world. We are the only initiative that has this setup of a cooperation between the public sector and the financial sector. And even though it is a success and it is a unique setup, in our view, it is not a complicated one, and it is especially replicable. So I think that in a lot of other economies, this setup and this framework can really be mirrored as well, also in your economies. And I hope that you will take this with you and maybe give it a thought for yourself as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan and Nina, for these interesting insights into green finance and how it can be put into practice. So in a next step, we're going to look at the second part of our webinar, which is evolving around transition finance and just transition finance. My name is Hannah Bartels. I'm also part of the Environment Agency Austria, and me and my colleague Olga are going to introduce you to these two subjects. So to begin with, we're going to look into what does transition finance and just transition finance actually imply, how it is related to the green transition itself. And we're going to see that both concepts are quite a bit different in their approach, but in the end, they're both really, really necessary in order to implement the green transition itself, and also to accommodate maybe for flaws that might arise when implementing just green measures. So I'm going to begin looking at just transition and the financing of the just transition, and thereby it's interesting in order to understand the concept to look at the rationale behind it. So we see that the green transition can only succeed if it is conducted in a fair, can you go back please? We can, in a fair and inclusive way, and leaves no one behind. So in that sense, we understand that transition and the financing of the transition, just transition, addresses certain social challenges emerging from the green transition. So this might be a little abstract at first. So I'm trying to give you an example. So imagine there's a country that is imposing a carbon tax because it wants the market to move away from very high emitting and carbon intensive energy production, for example. So by imposing this carbon tax, we expect prices for carbon energy to rise, which also will result in rising prices for heating that is fossil fuel based. So that might be a problem for actually a lot of families who are not able to pay these prices and which might face energy poverty in this regard. So this is a very classic example for just transition, or the need for just transition, because we see we are imposing a green measure that is necessary, as we argue that we need to move away from carbon heating. But then we see that this measure that we're setting is actually causing a lot of problems and does not allow to take everyone on board in that regard, by creating indeed energy poverty. And just transition is looking in particular at these cases where the green transition actually might leave people behind, which needs to be addressed through other measures, and we're going to see what these measures are within the realm of just transition. So with that, I'm going to move on to looking into transition and transition finance. What do we mean with that in particular? So when we talk about transition and transition finance, it's all sort of based on the idea that financing solely the development of green activities will to some extent fall short of delivering on our climate goals, for example, the net zero objective of 2050. Therefore, it creates the idea that in particular high-emitting companies require support in moving towards a more sustainable business model that is not yet green. So in that regard, we understand transition finance as investments into companies that are dedicated to the transition towards a more sustainable business model, but are not yet green to the extent that we could consider investments in these companies as green finance. So to make a little conclusion on both of these ideas, we see that just transition finance and transition finance have quite a different underlying concept, but we also see that both of them are actually required for successful implementation of the green agenda and thus also the green transition itself. So on the next slide, I'm going to continue to begin with looking a bit into the concept of transition finance. So not just transition finance, but we're going to start with transition finance, looking at it at the context of green and conventional finance, which will maybe make a little clearer what transition finance is actually about. So we have this graph where we see that transition finance is actually somewhere located between general finance, so that would be finance without any sustainability objectives, as well as green finance, which we already consider finance, in already green activities. So in that regard, we can understand transition finance as sort of finance into activities that are expected to become green over time. That is also shown in the time dimension which this graph has. So we see that the amount of transition finance will diminish over time, and it will sort of merge with the required green finance until in the long term we only expect that green finance is required. So why is that so? So the idea, of course, is that the companies are expected to transition. So in the long run, all of them will become at some point green due to maybe technological developments, but also a general shift of the market towards greener activities. So in the long run, they won't require any transition finance anymore because they have completed their transition. That at least is the expectation that we currently impose. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how transition finance is looked at from a regulator's perspective. As we all know, that transition finance still is a rather new concept. We don't yet have in place proper regulations, as Nina's introduced in the first part in green finance, where we already have binding laws, etc., on what is considered green finance. But we only have yet these recommendations by the European Commission in place that were published in 2023. And there we see that the Commission defines transition finance as the financing of investments that are compatible with the transition, which makes sense, as well as avoids lock-ins. So what do we mean when we talk about lock-ins, or more specifically carbon lock-ins? So carbon lock-ins essentially refer to technologies that are inconsistent or even incompatible with a low-carbon future, or limits the progress towards this future. So a practical example would be if a company invests in infrastructure to refurbish old refineries or even to construct new ones, because that is just by default not compatible with investments into in a low carbon future or low carbon activities. So the Commission essentially gives us some hints on what they would consider transition finance already. Some of them have already been mentioned before, but I'm just going to quickly go through them. So what is considered transition finance are investments into portfolios that are tracking the EU climate benchmarks. At the moment, we have 2 EU climate benchmarks, and these benchmarks are essentially defined as investment benchmarks that incorporate specific objectives related to greenhouse gas emissions reductions and the transition to a low carbon economy. So on the one hand, we have the EU climate transition benchmarks, as well as the EU Paris aligned benchmarks. They have a similar approach, but essentially one of the key difference between them lies in the activities that a portfolio is allowed to include in order to comply for them. So as the name probably allows to think of, the EU Paris aligned benchmarks do not allow for funding or for the financing of particular fossil fuel infrastructure, for example. Then, of course, the EU taxonomy is also a very important determinant when it comes to transition finance. So we've heard it's very much applied to defining what is green finance, but we also see that the taxonomy defines some transitional activities which would be considered transition finance if aligned with the requirements that are rolled out in the taxonomy, as well as we have certain requirements for taxonomy eligible activities that are not yet aligned, but are going to become so over a certain period of time. It's usually maximum 5 years, but exceptionally also 10 years. So if that is conducted within the allowed period, then this could also be considered transition finance. Then the Commission also refers to investments into activities with a credible transition plan. We will see later on that the subject of credible transition plans is also very popular, or paid attention to by many other institutions in the sector. So what do we mean when we talk about credible transition plans of companies? Just to give you an example, they are usually supposed to be science-based, in line with the 1.5-degree trajectory. They demand action, not pledges, and they're also specific in terms of midterm but also long-term targets and require external reporting. And then finally, the Commission refers to investments into economic activities with science-based targets. You probably, when you've heard about science-based targets, you probably heard about currently the main institution which accredits these science-based targets, which is SBTi, the Science Based Targets Initiative. So on the next slide, we can just see what we've discussed before. So companies have multiple ways to articulate their transition finance needs, as I've mentioned before. And this graph also quickly goes into how the companies then can essentially raise the finance they need for their transition. So that could be green or other sustainability bonds, following, for example, the EU Green Bond Standard, green or other sustainability loans, equity financing, and specialized lending. This slide, I think we can skip and move forward to the next one, which is concerned with a roadmap for companies on how their transition could look like in order to also qualify for transition financing. So we would start at the left side of the graph with the economic activity and move clockwise according to the arrows. So a company starts by looking at its economic activities and making a materiality assessment. The next step would be choosing a climate scenario or decarbonization path for the economic activity and set transition targets according to them. In the next step, the company would also need to set up a transition plan that includes targets, but also measures about implementing the transition. Of course, economic feasibility is very important, as well as financial planning. And of course, a company would have to assign responsibility both on a leadership level, but also on the implementation level when it comes to transition. As a next step, we would have progress and impact monitoring and then reporting. So if we move forward, we will also see that some of the regulation, if you click on the next slide, relate to certain steps within this sort of roadmap towards transition. For example, if we look at the CSRD already requires some companies that are required to report their transition plan. And if they don't have one, state that as well, or why they don't have one, essentially. So if we move on, there are some international publications, some examples of publications on transition finance. So we have here OECD, G20, and GFANZ, just as examples. And we can also see that the topic of credible transition plans is very dominant also in many publications. So actually many actors are concerned with how can you actually define credibility when it comes to transition plans. On the next slide, we have also compiled some we found relevant publication in terms of transition finance. So you're very welcome to read into them in case you want to learn more about transition finance as a concept.
Thank you, Hannah. So now I will continue to talk more about and explain more the concept of just transition finance. As Hannah already mentioned, just transition finance has to do also with the social impact. Of course, we understand that greening of the economies and phasing out specific sectors or changing the ways businesses work and economies work will influence the business models and influence also the employees who are working in those sectors affected. So therefore, just transition concept has appeared, and basically it was created first by trade unions in 80s. So the just transition concept considers the certain social vulnerabilities arising from the transition. It also talks about the vulnerable groups of people or communities. It considers also indigenous communities in the regions affected. It considers energy and transport poverty, and European Union has defined what is meant under the energy and transport poverty. The concept relates to specific regions and sectors, and it was created basically as the European Green Deal has the purpose of leaving no one behind. So in the European Green Deal, the just transition mechanism was developed, and this mechanism includes also just transition fund. The money for this fund are taken from the EU budget, from EU funding programs, as well as are leveraged by the EIB group. Just Transition Fund is allocated according to the territorial needs. Initially, the European Commission has identified the EU regions that will be significantly impacted by the transition to the green economy. And these are the regions relying on coal, peat, lignite, or other carbon-intense industries. Yes, here on this map, you can see the different regions. And the eligible regions have to prepare territorial just transition plans in order to access the funds. So these territorial just transition plans shall substantiate the need for the financing, define the vulnerable groups impacted by the transition, and also explain how they are impacted. If there are indigenous communities, they should be mentioned as well, and describe the measures suggested to address the impact, as well as estimate what is the volume of funding is necessary. In the Western Balkans, the Just Transition Fund is not supposed to be available. However, Just Transition measures shall be financed under the Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance. And usually, European Commission is following the approaches which proved to function well. Therefore, territorial approach will be used also for supporting the Western Balkans with the aim of ensuring justice during the transition. Additionally to IPA, the revenues generated from carbon price and introduction shall serve also for financing just transition measures. Just transition mechanism covers all of the is developed to cover everyone, leaving no one behind, right? So in respect of people and citizens, the measures finance would be offering the reskilling and upskilling, generation of employment and job upgrading, improving of energy efficient housing, investing into fight against energy and mobility poverty, poverty reduction, and social protection in general. Also for creating clean and healthy environments and sustainable and resilient infrastructure. In respect of companies and sectors, large part of Just Transition Fund is directed for the support of SMEs and startups, especially with the innovative solution, for the research and development, for the improving situation and ensuring the justice, new investment opportunities, and easier access to loans. And in respect of the member states and regions, the measures finance include reskilling and education, employment generation, clean and healthy environment, access to cheaper green services and products, regional development, public and sustainable transport, and improving energy infrastructure, district heating, and transportation networks. Additionally, to Just Transition Fund, European Commission has considered setting up social climate fund. This is still the work in process. It is still not accessible by the member states. However, it was created alongside the European emission trading scheme for emissions from fuel combustion in building, drone sectors, and further sectors. And as I understand, the emission trading scheme is also the topic which is relevant for the Western Balkans. So this mechanism is also worth to look at when you think of just transition finance. So member states might use the Social Climate Fund to support structural measures and investments in the energy efficiency, renovation of business, clean heating, and also for direct income support of the vulnerable communities which are impacted by the transitioning. In order to access the Social Climate Fund, the member states have to create and submit national social climate plan, and then European Commission assesses and agrees with the estimate of the funding or not. So this National Social Climate Fund is similar to the Territorial Just Transition Plan, which was just mentioned. So the revenues from the auctioning of allowances from ETS2, as well as 50 million allowances from the existing European Union ETS, will be used for the Social Climate Fund. In respect of the Western Balkans, there was an initiative which is also financed by European Union, implemented from December 2020 till December 2023. This initiative was called Initiative for Coal Regions in Transition in the Western Balkans and Ukraine. The aim of this initiative, they also started first with identifying the regions which are impacted by transitioning. This initiative was managed by European Commission and 6 partners, among them the World Bank, the Energy Community Secretariat, the EBRD, and the European Investment Bank. And this initiative is similar to the EU initiative for coal regions in transition, which functions since 2017. So again, it's just that European Commission, when something functions well and proves that mechanism is working, then they repeat it for the candidate economies as well. The Just Transition, I will repeat again, is planned by the European Commission to be financed under Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance. And during this initiative, 17 regions were identified as impacted by transition. 13 of these regions are in the Western Balkans. Mostly impacted are Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia. We encourage you to check the website of this initiative because it has a lot of information and it's quite fresh. So the newsletter summarizing all the activities taken, the recorded webinars on just transition in the region. The webinars are from 2023, and there is a specific webinar on the financing of just transitioning. Presentations for download and recommendations for decision making and taking actions. Yeah, and with this, I will end this introduction to just transition finance, and will pass the word to my colleague Hannah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Olga. So in this very last section of our webinar today, I'm trying to add on what Olga has just presented and try to put the idea and the concept of just transition into practice, and therefore present to you a just transition example from my home country, Germany. So I'm going to talk a bit about how just transition is conducted in the Linnite area in Lausitz-Lusatia region in the states of Brandenburg, Saxony, in Eastern Germany. So yeah, on the left-hand side, you can see a map of Germany with all its defined just transition regions. So you can see that they're predominantly in Eastern Germany, but also some are located in Western Germany, which is a bit cut off of the map. So what is going on in Lusatia? It's actually the second largest lignite area in Germany with multiple open cast mines and a yearly production capacity of 60 million tons. Also, within the lignite sector, there are around 8,000 regional employees. So on the next slide, we're going to see a little bit about the political context of Germany. So Germany has committed to climate neutrality 2045 and decided to start phase out coal latest by 2038, but if possible already at 2035, which would be obviously better from a climate perspective. So in order to comply with these pledges, Germany has started to close down some of its lignite mines, yet, however, a closing date for Lusatia lignite mines have not yet been determined. So how did the Just Transition Fund come in to support the just transition in this region? So with the phase-out decision in Germany, we saw that the Lusatian lignite mining region in Brandenburg and Saxony is actually one of the most affected regions by the transition towards a climate neutral economy. That is so because the lignite industry plays a very big role in regional value creation, but also as an employer for professions in particular, also with high levels of qualification and to some extent also above average incomes. This is also due to the fact that the industry itself is very labor and equipment intensive due to its open cast mines and power plants, and is closely intertwined with the regional economy in these states. So in order to address these challenges arising from the green transition, the European Commission announced that there are going to be 4 just transition focus regions in the states of North Rhine-Westphalia, Brandenburg, Saxony, and Saxony-Anhalt, which will in total be provided with 2.5 billion euros to support the transition there. So if you look what's going on in Saxony and Brandenburg, we see that 1.4 billion euros, so more than half of the money that is provided to Germany in total, will actually be invested in a just transition in the region due to its dependency on fossil energy production. In particular, these EU funds are going to be used for innovation and the introduction of technologies geared towards renewable energies and the circular economy. But we also see that there's going to be trials to replace raw materials such as gypsum from coal-fired power plants with green hydrogen-based solutions. In particular, in the mining district itself, there are going to be investments into innovative SMEs in the green sector, such as bio-based raw materials, resource efficiency, and the circular economy, as well as for the construction of hydrogen power plants. So, of course, one key idea is to create new employment opportunities for lignite workers in the green sectors, and therefore, of course, to keep qualified, but also the young people in particular in the region. So therefore, there has already also been the support to SME programs that in particular contribute to the reorientation, diversification, but also the securing of jobs and apprenticeships in the region by, for example, focusing on circular economy. So to put this into numbers, we see that the fund in the state of Saxony in the region will contribute to retaining almost 1,300 people in work, but also supports the expansion of vocational schools in the area. We also see that some of the fund will go into the expansion of climate-neutral local public transport to strengthen the attractiveness of the location, also in response to a more decentralized range of jobs for the affected employees. So we also see that just transition is a very multi-dimensional concept. So it's not only going to be about keeping the jobs for those who work in the lignite sector by transforming them so they fit for working in the green sector, but also, for example, looking at the transport options and allowing people to stay within their home regions, even if new job opportunities might not be around the corner, by allowing them to rely on public transport services in order to enable them to move also their workplace location. So finally, I'm going to show you just another regional development project that is supported by the Just Transition Fund, which is the Lausitz Science Park, that will be established in the Lausitz region to become a research, innovation, and science location that, for example, will focus on research and development of energy systems, but also look at technologies for the decarbonization itself. And with that, I'm ending the introduction to the Lusatian region and handing over to Olga for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone, for your attention, for learning from us about the green, sustainable transition and just transition finance. And we hope to welcome you soon at our further webinars. And thank you for your active participation. We are happy that all economies have been represented from the whole region. Many thanks also for the speakers for presenting.
Thank you.
Thank you.